So we start, or he is trying to do something. Good morning, everybody. We start today's webinar. This is the first knowledge workshop on a webinar format from the Department of IT&E. We have been holding such knowledge workshops in the past also, but those were mostly while we had the registrations in the same format over the internet using Twitter and Facebook and website. This time too, the registration was something like that. But whereas in other knowledge workshops, what we did was to actually sit down in a place in the Vishwa Bangla Convention Center where there would be more than 400 people, usually capacity. And we have held knowledge workshops on blockchain, artificial intelligence, 5G, and many other topics. Now we are experimenting with this format. Today we are fortunate to have Mr. Sudeep Datta. He's the head of projects Broadcom, and he's joining us from the USA, and he will be talking to us today on digital transformation, disruption, and trends. The format is that you can pose the questions using text messages, and the speaker will choose to reply then or later as he deems fit. So we have about 1 hour's time, and we are going to listen to Mr. Sudeep Datta, who is the head of products, digital biz ops, and he's going to talk to us today morning on digital transformation, disruption, and trends. Over to you, Sudeep.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. So let me first share my desktop, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to the government of West Bengal for inviting me to present at this webinar. I have my roots in West Bengal, and I'm more than gratified to be a part of this session. So today's session is about digital transformation, disruption, and trends. Before I get into the presentation, something about me and Broadcom. I was introduced as the head of products Broadcom. So I thought it's the opportune moment to talk about what I do at Broadcom and what Broadcom is all about. So I head up products for digital biz ops at Broadcom. And prior to joining Broadcom, I was the VP of cloud management at Oracle, where we initiated various projects around data center automation and cloud. I was in Oracle for almost 2 decades before joining CA Technologies, and now I am part of Broadcom, which acquired CA Technologies. Like any other Bengali, I am passionate about soccer and music, and I take deep interest in technology startups, particularly those originating in India. Now, a few words about Broadcom. Broadcom is the market leader in communication chips. So if you go to Google and just type in market leader in communication technologies or chips, you are more likely than not to hit Broadcom as the top hit. It recently diversified into software with the acquisition of CN Technologies, and recently with the acquisition of the enterprise division of Symantec. Broadcom has a market cap of around 125 billion. To put things in perspective, I don't know how many of you have heard about Broadcom, but everyone has heard about IBM. IBM's market cap today as per the current stock price, is around 118 billion. So Broadcom is 7 billion bigger than IBM in terms of market cap. 95% of the internet traffic at any point in time, we are all using some device one in or the other. 95% of the traffic goes through devices enabled by Broadcom at any point in time. And it's one of the most profitable Fortune 5K companies in the Forbes list. Now, having said that, in full disclosure and in full disclaimer, I'm not representing Broadcom's technology in this particular session. So I would try to be technology neutral. I'm not representing Broadcom or any other company. Now, we have already read about the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution is about automation, is about machine learning, about artificial intelligence. So these are a couple of quotes. The first one comes from Deloitte Consulting. The fourth industrial revolution is still in its nascent stage. But with the swift pace of technology and disruption to business and society, the time to join is now. And from a personal perspective, I can tell you that I feel very fortunate to be part of this journey, part of this revolution, because I am born at a particular time in human history where we are going through this massive transformation, which is changing human lives. Digital is the main reason just over half of the companies in the Fortune 500 have disappeared since year 2000. And this is a quote by Accenture. Now that's a reality because digital disruption is pervasive and the new normal. And this is a survey by Accenture, which reveals 4 levels or 4 phases of disruption: durability, vulnerability, volatility, and viability. Let me explain each of them. A company, and I know there are attendees here who are from the public sector as well as the private sector. So when I say companies, I'm using it in broader scale. I know a lot of you do not work for corporations per se, and you are involved in the government, serving the society. So I'm using it in the very loose sense. So when we talk about durable companies, we are talking about companies who are products are market leading, and they are market leading by a big margin. So at this point in time, these companies do not see any competitor in the horizon, at least for now. An example of that would be Google search. An example of that would be AWS cloud. I know Microsoft recently won the federal bid, and they are making inroads, but still Amazon is head and shoulders above others. So you can consider them durable. Vulnerable companies are the companies who have started getting disrupted by competition, right? The competition has arrived in the horizon. They are still the market leaders. An example would be Netflix. You can consider Netflix being vulnerable to Amazon Video Services or YouTube, but they cannot sense it now. They're still at the top of the list, but they're vulnerable to competition. A company becomes volatile when they are really, really disrupted. An example would be IBM. IBM got really disrupted by the cloud. And at that point, what I have seen, and I have worked in big companies, one of the common mistakes that companies do at that point is they double down on their strength. So instead of reinventing themselves, instead of deconstructing themselves, they double down on what they're good at. And companies become viable when they adapt to digital transformation. They undergo the transformation process. They deconstruct what they are about. An example would be Microsoft, what they're going through. Between 2011 and 2018, there were more than 3,000 bankruptcies in the US across 18 different sectors. And retail was the most affected. And there is no surprise here because of Amazon, with 43 bankruptcies in 2018 alone. Now, the digital business transformation is a hard reality, right? And this is another survey by Accenture, which reveals that 71% of the companies are experiencing digital disruption. And if all these companies go bust, then 41 trillion in assets, in enterprise value is exposed to that. So it's a huge, huge risk for these companies. But still, in spite of that knowledge, IDC states that 40% of the Fortune 500 will be extinct in 10 years. And that's why these companies are pulling up their socks. They are spending a lot. 2.3 trillion is the projected spend over the next 5 years or so, roughly 4 to 5 years. And 50% of their IT budget is going in addressing the digital transformation. And that's growing at a compounded rate of 17% per annum. Now, this is another survey at the bottom by Forrester, which asks companies what stage they are in their digital transformation process. And 21% of the companies, interestingly, said that they have completed the process. Now, from our perspective, from our vantage point, we do not think so. Because to do digital transformation at scale, it is not only about putting your products on the web, it is not only about engaging over the web, it's not only about the systems of engagement. It is about the entire digital pipeline, right from planning to governing to building products, testing products, releasing products, operationalizing products, securing products that has to be digitally transformed. And that is what we call digital transformation at scale. And when we benchmark companies against that kind of benchmark, that kind of standard, we find that most of the companies are in the beginner stage and only few have advanced. And digitally advanced firms are more likely to succeed than the digital beginners in terms of revenue, in terms of whatever metrics they're measured. Now, that is not all doom and gloom, because historically, companies have reinvented in the face of disruption. Let's start with Kodak. Kodak was in the business of manufacturing and marketing film for cameras, and they transformed themselves in the mid-70s to more of a digital imaging and production company. The next one is BlackBerry. And I don't know how many of you used smartphone back in the days when BlackBerry was at its prime. They bet on chiclet keys. Chiclet keys are these big keys that you typically find in a keyboard. And they bet on that form factor. And when they got disrupted, they adopted the new age smartphones. Microsoft is an excellent example. Like the book Refresh by the Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, is a must read for a lot of us. It reveals how Microsoft went through the transformation process. Now, Microsoft, before that, was very, very proprietary in the sense that they were very focused on Windows. They were not pro open source, and they were not pro cloud either. So what we have seen Microsoft adopt over the last few years is they have become favorable to open source. In fact, if you go to Azure Cloud, you get a choice of your infrastructure. And they have adopted cloud as the primary development and deployment platform, period. The last one is Broadcom and CA Technologies. And I can humbly say that I have been part of this journey. When I joined CA Technologies around 3 years back, we had 15 odd tools. And we were in the business of developing and marketing tools. So what we transformed into is, instead of being tool focused, we became outcome focused. So don't focus on tools, focus on outcomes. And we consolidated our platform. We standardized our platform from 15 different tools to one single AIOps platform, operational intelligence platform powered by machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now, when I say Broadcom, it's not that I am touting. It is a source. It is from a lecture by Daryl Plummer, the distinguished analyst of Gartner. So historically, companies have reinvented in the face of disruption. Now, successful organizations in digital business operate differently. And what we see is they focus on digital business outcomes. And again, I'm using the word business very loosely. So for a government, it's the social outcomes. Now, the key point in this slide is all these companies that you see in these slides, they measure one or two specific things, right? They are not in the business of measuring a whole lot of ambiguous things. Nike focuses on, this is public information, you can find it on the web as well. Nike focuses on shoes per second. That is their single metric that the whole company rallies against. So right from the supply and delivery chain to development of software to developing systems of engagement, their single-minded focus is on shoes per second, is on increasing the number of shoes per second. So Nike sells almost 25 pairs of shoes every single second. For Apple, it's iPhones per minute. Recently, iPhone 11 was launched. The month after iPhone 11, Apple sold at the rate of 600 iPhones per minute worldwide. For Etsy, an e-commerce company, it's revenue per hour. For FedEx, it's labels per hour, right? We all know that FedEx is big time getting disrupted by the likes of Amazon. But FedEx is trying to reinvent itself. And this is the single metric. They are single-mindedly focused on increasing the labels per hour. Labels are the labels that they print and attach against the shipments. Digital experience, especially customer experience, is everything. Because gone are the days of my dad's era. My dad literally banked with the same bank throughout his life. Right? He didn't switch banks. Nowadays, the millennials have this much patience, razor thin patience. So customer loyalty is at a razor thin level. People switch banks, people switch hotels, people switch hospitals all the time. And that's why digital experience is of paramount importance. 83% of the US consumers say that having a positive customer experience with a brand is more important than the product itself. What does it mean? It means that when you shop in Amazon or you shop in Walmart.com, they are more bothered by the performance of the websites, performance of those sites, those e-commerce sites, than by the actual product that buy. 53% of the mobile site visits are abandoned if the page takes longer than 3 seconds to load. And this is very important. Coming from Oracle and the performance management world, we have talked to countless customers, and this is what everyone tells, that slow is the new down. Because if the web page or a website or whatever service you're offering does not respond within a stipulated time, then the customer, you lose the customer. And 60% of those customers never come back. And that's why the companies are making a significant effort to improve the end user experience to attract and retain customers. And the retention of customers is very important because it's not a one-time effort. It's not that you put up a website and it starts performing. It is about ongoing performance and developing a feedback loop through which you can monitor and improve the performance on a continual basis. Now let's look at a few examples across the different industry segments. Of course, because of the paucity of time, I have handpicked only a few customers across the different segments, but I'm sure there are way many success stories out there. The first one is Berkeley's. Now, it is a session over the web. Usually when I have a face-to-face session, I actually quiz the audience, which is the bank that developed the first ATM or launched the first ATM. It is Barclays. So in 1967, north of London, Enfield, in a place like Enfield, they had their first ATM branch. And Barclays is a 300-year-old bank. Like you can find its roots in 1690, literally the same year the East India Company was born. Now, this is a 300-year-old bank that is trying to reinvent itself. Now, every bank talks about omni-channel experience. That's nothing new. Today, the millennials, 83% of the millennials never ever go to a brick and mortar bank. They bank through either the web or mobile, whatever the handheld devices are. And so omni-channel experience is given. But what Barclays is trying to do is they're trying to bring more personalized and connected experience, and especially connected experience at important moments in life. For example, when someone gets married or buys a house or relocates or whatever the person does, Barclays wants to be associated at that moment in life. And they have increased those interactions at important moments by more than 111%. And these are all public information. You can find that in their quarterly statements on the web. So there are more than 2 billion interactions every single year. And that means a huge investment in their digital and IT infrastructure. And this is a slogan that they're using, their personalized experience. When you apply for a loan on Barclays.com, the experience of applying the loan used to previously take 6 days. So now their motto is to reduce 6 days to 6 clicks. So that's Barclays. Now KPN is a telco customer from the Western Europe. KPN is based in the Netherlands. They serve mainly Netherlands and Belgium, though they have presence in both B2C and B2B markets in Western Europe. Now, like any other telco, they are focusing on quad experience or converged experience. Like it is about providing video, data, wireless, and security through one single home device and one single channel. They are targeting, like any other telco, they are going for 5G readiness. They want to be 100% 5G ready by 2021. And 5G actually has some downstream effects on the underlying technology because, of course, with 5G, we can support billions of devices, billions and more, billions and billions of devices. In order to support that kind of device density, we have to slice the network. That's called network slicing, right? And in order to support network slicing, the underlying technology has to support network flow virtualization, NFV, which also has impact on the software-defined networking, the SDN technology that's under the covers. Now, they are targeting more than 50% adoption of software-defined networking. Now, if you work with telcos, like whether it is Verizon, AT&T, or Sprint in the US, or Telstra in Australia, or Vodafone or KPN or British Telecom in Europe, the adoption of new technology, they're usually very conservative on the adoption of new technologies like SDN. So the SDN adoption has been very low in spite of all the hype. But now 5G is acting as a forcing function to implement network flow virtualization and SDN. That's on the technology side. Now, all these carriers are also retailers. So there is a retail side of telco because you buy phones, right? You buy a plan, and they are trying to proactively handle customer complaints, order flows, bill shocks, etc. No one wants to get a bill shock, no consumer. So they are trying to proactively handle that through machine learning and artificial intelligence. And they are leveraging machine learning to reduce the mean time to resolution, MTTR, by 50%. Just to give an example of the work that Telstra is doing in Australia. So they are monitoring their end modems, basically the modems at the customers, at the consumer's place, at every single home through the DOCSIS protocol. And they have tied that monitoring process to an artificial intelligence engine so that it can detect proactively when a problem is likely to occur, and they would automatically resolve the problem remotely, or if it warrants sending an on-site person, they would send that person on-site. So telcos are going through a massive transformation as well. Talking of retail, let me take the example of Coty. Coty is from the fashion industry. They're based out of New York. Now, fashion retailing is going through a massive transformation as well. They have a virtual try and buy e-commerce experience. So you can use your handheld device or the web to virtually try and buy before you buy a product from Coty. Now, I am not a buyer of Coty's products, but people who buy kind of lipsticks or eyelashes or whatever you buy in Coty, right? They go through a buying process, and they eventually, after they try, they would like to check out from either through Walmart.com or through any other e-commerce website. Now, as you go through the process, a lot of customers drop off. And this is what we typically call a churn rate. Because as you go through the process of buying, you might abandon the process at any point in time. You might abandon what we call the shopping cart. And there are various reasons people abandon a shopping cart, right? It could be a social reason, like you talk to a friend and the friend advises against using that particular product. So you decide in the middle of buying that you wouldn't go with that product. Or it could be related to IT, that the performance of that particular website is not good, that fails to load within a particular expected period of time, and the consumer abandons the shopping cart. So they are trying to target a 62% drop in bounce rates, in churn rates. The industry average of churn rate or cart abandonment is 80%. So almost 1 in every 5 buyers abandon a cart. And for any retailer, that's a strict no-no. They would like to avoid that. They would also like to increase the basket size by 5x by selling looks over products. So instead of buying individual products like a lipstick or an eyelash or whatever it is, right? They are trying to sell looks. You buy a look instead of buying individual products. Now, if you compare across industries, this is very, very similar to what we just saw with telcos, right? Telcos are also trying to increase their wallet share or basket size. And that's the same with retailers like Coty. And that also has a social message. By selling looks, they are also trying to target a diverse audience. They are trying to celebrate what they call the diversity of looks. Now, moving on from the private sector to the public sector, the government of UK, right, is making great strides in digital transformation. First of all, and this is all public information, they have combined 2,000 different sites into one single site, right? And in course of my professional career, I have worked with different governments, government of Singapore, UK, here, several federal agencies in the US, in India. And I think, like, I don't want to kind of handpick one particular government for any praise, but you get a lot of public information out there in the web about their different initiatives. Now here we can see what the government of UK has done. So they have, first of all, they have consolidated, right? They have consolidated their sites into one single site offering various services. And you can go and check out their site. Omnichannel, they are also adopting an omnichannel strategy to get closer to citizens, including voice assistants. Their tax return is 100% digital. More than 90% per passport applications are supposed to go full digital by 2020. And I can tell you, I'm not a passport application of the UK government. Of course, I'm a foreigner. But the last time I was in London, the whole experience of going through immigration was a breeze. There is no human involved. You just scan your passport and it lets you in. The 2021 census will target a 75% online response. So that's the target that the British government is trying to achieve. Now, what are the enablers? Now, multi-cloud infrastructure is nothing new, right? We have been talking about cloud. Every single vendor is talking about cloud. Consumers are talking about cloud for years. So there is nothing new here. So the current annual run rate of cloud exceeds $100 billion. And that's only from the top 3, which is AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google, GCP, right? If you take the tier 2, which is Oracle, IBM Bluemix, the various service providers like Rackspace, then the number is way more. But despite the tremendous growth of public cloud, less than 25% of serious workloads today run on cloud, right? And there are multiple reasons for that, right? Especially around governance, around security, things like GDPR in EMEA. Then, of course, like concerns around performance. I have met a lot of CIOs who think that over 4 or 5 year period, the total spend on cloud is more than the total spend on on-premise. So there are several reservations, several skepticism around that, but things are improving. And 2021, it is said, will be the tipping point when the traditional IT market will be tipping over. And this is as per a survey by VMware around 2016. They took the survey at their annual event, which is VMworld. That's when, but I don't think the numbers are that important. The essence of the matter is the world is fundamentally hybrid. So customers have a mix of on-prem and cloud. Now, most of the banks are still on-prem. I see that because of the reasons that I stated. They're gradually moving into the cloud. Capital One is one bank in the United States that is 100% cloud as a policy. But we all know that Capital One had a negative experience with security lately. So people are still deliberating, people are moving to the cloud. The essence of the matter is things are fundamentally hybrid, and it is likely to be hybrid in the foreseeable future till 2035 or so. Cloud infrastructure is evolving as well. They're getting more dynamic and more ephemeral. Over the last 10 years, compute has fundamentally transformed. We used to talk about virtualization 10 years back as a means of consolidation, as a means of migration. We used to think that virtualization was very dynamic. Now everyone is into containers, right? They're using Kubernetes or OpenShift as the container orchestration platform. And they're using even serverless, function as a service. So you get serverless compute from the various cloud providers. So this is getting more dynamic, more ephemeral, more nimble, more lightweight. 35% of the tech companies surveyed by Accenture are planning to adopt quantum. Like qubits are still evolving. They're not out in the state of maturity that it will have large scale adoption, but customers are nibbling with it. They are playing with the ideas, especially around analytics. The huge demand for cloud-based analytics puts a lot of pressure on parallel computing, right? And today our answers are primarily around fast processors or GPUs, and we think that over the next 5 years, we will see the adoption of quantum computing. And it will be gradual. It won't be a step function. It will be a gradual adoption. The enabler number 2 is what I call hyperconnected networks. Almost 25 years back, Scott McNally, the then Sun CEO, mentioned that the network is the computer. Right? At that time, we didn't appreciate the essence of that statement. Now today, we realize that nothing can be closer to truth than that particular statement. So everything is around networks. Now, the pressure on network is coming from the application economy. The applications are all pervasive, right? There are millions and millions of applications. 3.4 billion of world's population, which is almost half of world's population, have access to phones, to mobile devices. So they consume all these different applications. And there were 194 odd million downloads in 2018. So it is an application economy, which is putting a lot of pressure on the network. And the applications are distributed, right? Gone are the days of developing monolithic applications in a mainframe or COBOL that kind of run monolithically, right? It's fundamentally distributed. Even when there is a mainframe involved as a system of record, it is communicating or the system of engagement running on the cloud is communicating to a mainframe within the data center through VPCs, for example. And there is inter-cloud communication as well. There are a lot of customers, there are a lot of companies who run a portion of their application on AWS, and they could be running Office 365 on Azure or some other portion of the application on Azure. They could be accessing their SaaS application on Salesforce. So things are fundamentally hybrid. I already talked about 5G, the effect of 5G on network flow virtualization and SDNs. So networking is getting more and more software defined because of the demand. And it's getting dense because of IoT and connected devices. Now, when we talk about large-scale digitization, right, or adoption of modern technologies, the most neglected, yet the most important part of this whole digital change is the network. And I talked about it in several talks. When we talk about application performance, and I talk to a lot of peers in the application performance industry, they talk about server performance, they talk about containers, they talk about the different, the Java server, like servlets, hosted by WebLogic, WebSphere, the different technologies out there, Amazon Beanstalk, Heroku, Salesforce, Heroku, they talk about the server and application technologies. But very few of us talk about the network. But if we look at today's distributed application, network is the most important component within the digital chain. Now, there were cases in the US where people couldn't access applications or application performance suffered because there was a public event going on in that particular city, a concert or a particular football game or something going on, which puts pressure on the network so much so that the government was forced to shut down certain kind of social media communication. And that is what we call the noisy neighbor problem. This is a classic noisy neighbor problem. That a lot of times when we talk about digital performance, we are talking about server and application performance. But what about the performance of the network, which you don't control? Maybe your neighbor is downloading a very hefty video, which is affecting your application performance. So that is what we call the noisy neighbor problem. Then there is what we call the elephant and mice problem. Like there could be a huge stream of data flowing and there could be chatty data following that. So your communication is disrupted because of large chunks of data, maybe a backup going on in the network. So network segregation, network planning, all these things are very, very important. And this is the age of what I call the hyper-connected networks. So network exists in different forms. Like, of course, there is a network within the data center. There is network in campus, and then there is WAN. And then when you are dealing with hybrid cloud, you are dealing with the network of the carrier, which you have no control of. The enabler number 3 is AI-driven intelligence, analytics, and automation. And kind of, I can spend possibly 40 minutes on this topic alone, but I have clubbed them again in the interest of time. Because of the data proliferation across the digital life cycle, it is impossible to deal with this data manually. Right? Today, AI is being adopted in various fields to deal with this data. And the most common usages are in natural language processing, image processing, anomaly detection, regression and prediction, multivariate correlation. Right? These are some of the usages. There is an excellent YouTube video by Frank Chen, who is the partner in Andreessen Horowitz. He basically talks about AI, what's working and what's not. Right? It's working great for questions like image processing, like Pinterest is a great example, right? Which employs image processing to answer specific targeted questions, right? A Google Translator is a great example of a read ahead text processing. So it is being employed in specific places. What AI is not good at today is in answering ad hoc questions. You cannot ask arbitrary questions to the AI. And in the field that I deal with, according to Frank, when I met him, root cause analysis is the holy grail. Finding the root cause of a problem in a very distributed system is a very hard problem, which is not yet solved by AI. We are trying to solve it. in Broadcom and in the industry as a whole, but we are getting there. We are not there yet. That's why we see increasing adoption of ML and AI in retail, banking, healthcare, and various security operations. In banking, for example, they use anomaly detection to do kind of fraud analysis. The payment security systems are all enabled by sophisticated anomaly detection engines, which has very minimal false positives or false negatives, if at all. These algorithms are tested uh, to the minutest degree because think about it, right? If a bank, large bank like JPMC or HSBC kind of gets false positives or false negatives, their call centers would be buzzing all day. So we see the increasing adoption. There is a certain degree of maturity that we see in retail, in banking, healthcare, and in certain operations. And because of that maturity, there is ready to use algorithms and infrastructure available with a mix of public clouds and open source. Now, open source is all pervasive now. So I need not talk about open source at all. Like a lot of these are being enabled by open source. Here I have named few algorithms available on public cloud, Google TensorFlow, PyTorch, Caffe, etc. There are ready to use infrastructure providers like Databricks for machine learning, Elastic for big data. And finally, robotic automation. The mundane and the repeatable tasks in retail banking and insurance, specifically claims processing and things like those, are being handled by what we call robots or agents. And those are completely humanless. Now, till now, I have only talked about the enablers. What about the forces of friction? Because if there is no friction, if it is completely unconstrained, then the problem becomes easy. But there are constraints at various layers. How do we manage service levels versus cost, right? One of our customers told me once that anyone can be 100% available at indefinite cost. We can install a whole bunch of high-scale machines, mainframes, craze, and be 100% available. So the key ask is to be efficient, right, while being available. So CapEx and OpEx affect strategic initiatives. The challenge is to do more with less. And here are some factors. KPN, the telco that I talked about, targets to adopt new technology, all those technologies, 5G, NFV, SDN, while saving 350 million euros on OpEx between 2019 and 2021. And Barclays has similar ambitions, like to save from 500 less branches, more automation and resilience. The global 2000 companies, and this is as per a survey, are estimated to save half a trillion USD on OpEx so that they can utilize that for innovation. Because today, that 500 billion goes in just keeping the lights on. So they are trying to transfer that money from just keeping the lights on using automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and use that more for innovation. The second friction is quality, agility versus quality, right? We have already talked about customer experience and why it needs to be ongoing, why there has to be a feedback back to engineering, and how the engineering process has to be agile. So agile is nothing new. People have been talking about agile for the last few years. The question is, how do you manage and maintain quality while being agile? It's like asking someone to run at Usain Bolt's speed, but not stumble in the process. So how do you manage these conflicting forces, right? And we know like what poor quality can lead to, right? We saw like a couple of crashes with driverless cars. We saw how the Boeing 737 MAX 8 couple of crashes happened and cost lives because of faulty design. And these are all software, right? When I talk about aircrafts and cars, think about it this way. Today, we are not talking of mechanical engineering. We are talking about software engineering. We are talking digital. So quality is of paramount importance, right? And the third friction is really security. And security is an imperative. Security landscape has gotten more complicated over the last 20 years. Because 20 years back, it was mostly thrill-seeking kids who used to break into a particular website and try to kind of harass people. Today, these harassers are not mere kids. These are organized syndicates. And if you look at the recent breaches, a lot of these breaches came from internal employees, not from external sources, right? For example, the Capital One breach, which affected 106 million consumers, that was the result of a particular employee's actions. So it is getting trickier by the day. And it's not arbitrary. It is very targeted today. It is very sequenced. For example, the hackers can breach into the firewall. From the firewall, they would get into the web server. From the web server, they get into the application server. From the application server, they traverse the JDBC to get into the database. So it's very sequenced, and it's very persistent. It's not a one-time attack. They persist these attacks over time. So security is very important, but the question is, how can you be secure without affecting performance? Because security also means that you are injecting more and more codes and processes in your digital pipeline, which could affect performance. So how can you be nimble while being secure? Now, here is a best practice for being digital at scale. As I already talked about, digital at scale is not only about digitizing your system of engagement, but about automating your entire pipeline, right? When we talk about business outcomes and when we talk to C-level execs and business owners, or in a government, the owner of a particular department, we talk about certain outcomes, like could be transforming customer experience, could be improved productivity, etc. But when we look at the entire delivery chain, right from product management to project management to engineering to testing to operationalizing, we see a disconnect. Because what are the metrics? Think about it. What are the metrics that the business owners are measuring? We talked about iPhones per minute for Apple. We talked about shoes per second for Nike. So those are the kind of metrics that the business owners are interested in. If you look at IT operations is measuring availability, alarm severity, SLAs, service level objectives, mean time to resolution. The developers are measuring defects, code coverage, release health, cycle times. The product owners or the product managers are measuring output rate, lead and cycle times, planned versus actual, and things like those. So there is a huge disconnect. How do we know that what an organization is adopting in the upstream process is actually influencing, improving the business outcome on an ongoing basis? That's the challenge that every single organization has to go through. And we see a huge disconnect today. And it's not us seeing that. Like Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, one of the largest banks in America, in their quarterly statement, and we were very surprised because Jamie Dimon is a big shot. He is talking about his engineering process. He's not only talking about the financials, he's talking about agile implementation. He's talking about how to get there. And that's why I think the key imperative here is the entire digital chain, entire delivery chain, right from the ideation of a product, the ideation of a service, the engineering of that particular service, the delivery of that service, the operationalizing of that service has to be aligned with the eventual outcome. Here is the summary. To transform old economy into what we call design for digital. The legacy way was limited episodic interactions with customers. The digital way is continuous engagement across the customer journey. To transform the customer experience, the legacy way was rigid and risk averse, annual planning, and the digital way is being agile, experimental, adaptable, and collaborative. IT was always treated as a cost center. IT is often treated only as a cost. So IT is heavily into cost cutting. So IT, the new way to look at IT is it's a part of cost of goods to generate value, growth, and profitability, right? For in the social sector, it would be value. In the corporate sector, it could be profitability. But IT should be looked upon as an investment, as a cost of goods, as opposed to pure cost. Hierarchical command-driven decision-making is changing into a more data-driven decision-making and automation. I was recently talking to site recoverability, site reliability engineer, SRE, as they call it. SRE is a term coined by Google. And he mentioned that we are all engineers today. We like to talk with data. We do not want to talk with perception. So data-driven decision-making and automation is gaining more and more prevalence, leading to sustained growth and profitability. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. Um, and let me open it up for questions and answers. We have only a few minutes left, so I would possibly take only a couple of questions. Let me look at the chat windows to see if there are any questions. Okay, so one of the questions is, are these US data or global trends may vary in other countries? That's a good question. I don't know what slide you are referring to. In every single slide, I have called out the source at the bottom of the slide, number one. Number two is, to me, it is not the absolute value of something that matters, right? I mean, whether it is like 25% of the companies have moved to the cloud or not, that what I focus on are the trends. I think the trends are pretty much global, right? The absolute value or the numbers could differ from country to country, but the trends are pretty much global. The next one was from the moderator to the attendees, so it's not a question for me. Let me go down. Yeah, there was a question from Rangin Lairi. Given the digital disruption, where do you see startups playing their role along with the big guns you referred to in the PPT? I think startups have a huge role. In fact, I think when I mentioned cloud as an enabler, I think cloud has and open source have opened up the field and making it more level playing for the startups, first of all, right? Because they do not have to invest in infrastructure. Like most of the Amazon tenants would be primarily startups, right? And that gives them a ready-to-use playing ground for developing their application. Similarly, open source, most of the technologies that I talked about are pure open source, right? Which has made it accessible to a large section of the population to innovate upon. So it has already kind of enabled a more level playing field. Now, coming to the very specifics, when we talk about big companies, a lot of these underlying technologies come from startups, right? For example, like I talked about containers. Docker was a startup not too long back. I talked about Elastic, right, as a big data platform. Elastic was a startup which was competing with a more proprietary platform like Splunk, right? So a lot of the AI companies that I talked about are pure startups, like Pinterest is a startup. Like there are tons of, if you go to the lecture that I talked about, Frank Chen's lecture on AI, what's working and what's not, he mentions all his portfolio companies, which are essentially startups. So startups have a huge role to play, and even the big companies, that technologies they're adopting, right, either through inorganic plays or through the open source community, are essentially contributed to a large extent by startups. I have a question from Mr. Sen. What is the user experience of the UK government? 2000 services in one. Isn't it too confusing for the US user citizen? Yes and no. The thing is the way, and this is my third person observation in full disclaimer, right? I do not want to speak on behalf of the UK citizens. But what I've seen is they have done a good job in organizing all of these, right? It under the hood, it may be still running as separate services or microservices, but there is one single portal where they get everything. And because it is on public internet, it is very easy for anyone to see. So it would be like, I leave it to your judgment on how convenient it is. I found it very convenient. That's one thing on the convenience side of things. The other thing is, because of the consolidation, they would possibly have saved a lot on the infrastructure, right? Because rather than having federated systems, multiple systems, they consolidated, they saved on that infrastructure, and possibly they can pass on that cost as innovations to their citizens. So that's pretty much what I have. I know there are speakers after me, so I would like to thank you once again and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's inaugural session. Thank you very much, Sudeep, for this wonderful session. We have recorded it all, and it will be available in YouTube as well. And we will pose you further questions when need be. But thank you very much for your time. We understand that it's Thanksgiving Day very soon on Monday, and you are all terribly busy. Thanks for sparing the time. Bye-bye.